This is Greg Pass with the Americans of Wartime Experience. Today's date is March the 8th, 2022, and I have the pleasure of sitting down over a Zoom meeting with Colonel Thomas T.C. Smith. I'm in Woodbridge, Virginia, and the Colonel is in Williamsburg, Virginia. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
You're welcome, Greg.
So as we talked about earlier before the recording started, we're going to talk a little bit about your military service, and then we're going to transition a little bit later into your participation in the anniversary ceremonies at Arlington in Virginia.
Okay.
So could you please give us your full name and tell us where you were born?
Sure. Thomas C. Smith. I was born in San Francisco, California.
And do you have any military veterans in your family?
I do. My dad was a World War II veteran. He commanded amphibious, what they call them, ducks, amphibious landing craft on D-Day. And he spent 23 years in the Army.
What do you know what unit he was in by chance?
453rd Amphibious Truck Company.
Outstanding. Any other veterans?
I have two nephews that were, actually three nephews that were all involved in Afghanistan. One of them Special Forces, one Ranger, two Rangers.
Outstanding. So what was your motivation to join in the military service?
That's a great question. I was invited to join.
Invited.
Uncle Sam drafted me.
And what year would that have been?
That would have been 1967.
Okay. So tell us how you got the news that you were being invited into the U.S. Army, and where did you go for your training?
Well, I received the notice in the mail, and my parents, I'm in Northern Virginia. My parents are in Europe. So my dad doesn't know about this, but I went down to the recruiting station in Alexandria on King Street, and I decided if you're drafted, you're in for 2 years, but then they can do whatever they want with you. They can put Greg in the infantry, the artillery, quartermaster, whatever. And I wanted to have, if you join the Army, you're in for 3 years, assuming that you have the qualifications to be accepted in whatever training you want. So of all the training that I could get, I decided to be an airborne infantryman. And my dad was not particularly happy with that decision, but I don't regret it. So I came in the Army, went to basic training at Fort Knox, advanced infantry training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and then jump school, and then the 82nd Airborne Division. And from there, I took the test for officer candidate school, and I was accepted into the engineer school at Fort Belvoir. And then from there, understand, Greg, at this time, almost everybody is going to Vietnam. It's just a function of what you're going to be doing. So they came and said, anybody want to see if they can pass the flight school test? And if your scores are high enough to be in OCS, your scores are high enough to get into flight school. Just some people don't have the aptitude. It's not a good or bad thing. Some people have it, some people don't. And I figured, well, I might as well be a helicopter pilot if I'm going to go to Vietnam. So I took the test. I have no idea how I passed it, because they give you the test on Saturday. By Saturday, you are so exhausted because of the regiment that you go through all during the week. The proctor had to wake me up 3 times during that 4-hour exam to finish the test. So somehow I passed it, went to flight school, and then from there I got married, and then 63 days later I was flying combat missions in Vietnam.
So you started off then enlisted and then got your commission. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay. How long into your service were you enlisted and transitioned into commission?
About 15, 16 months.
Okay. So wow. So you got married right before deployment, huh?
Yeah. I was 22 and my wife was 20.
Mm-hmm.
She was if you're familiar with Radford University,
yes.
Yep. She was in Radford at the time. And so I went to Vietnam, she went back to school.
And was she a high school sweetheart?
No, actually, it's a little bit of a long story, but I met her when I was in OCS. They rotate you through leadership positions and then grade you on how well you do. And I just happened to be the candidate battalion commander when they had this little get together with college girls, and we were not even allowed hardly out of our barracks. So this is a big deal for us. And when you talk to underclassmen, you never talk to them nicely. And so you have 2 guards at the door when the girls come in, and you call them beanheads, and you say, beanhead, if any good looking chick, and then you sit right over this table. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. And my wife showed up, and that's how I met her.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, rest was history. Yeah.
That's great. So flight school, what was that? What was that like, and what type of aircraft were you training on?
It was It was fun. It's a little taxing sometimes, but it was fun. It was we flew depending on you either threw a TH just means training helicopter, TH-55, which is a little bitty aircraft, and then what I flew was an OH-23, which is kind of like a Korean War. All these are reciprocating engine engine aircraft, and you go through the primary school at Fort Walters, Texas, and that's where you learn basic takeoffs and landings, confined areas, emergency procedures, auto rotations, stuff like that. And then you go to Fort Rucker, Alabama for the advanced part where you learn to fly the Huey and do tactics and do instrument training. It's all done at Fort Rucker now. But so I had two roommates, and yeah, we had fun. It was demanding, but it was fun.
And how much total time were you training in aircraft?
I think we wound up with about 240 hours.
Well, I mean, months long. How long was the school?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see, we started in January and graduated in September.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
So this puts us in, what year would this be when you,
This would have been 1969.
69? Okay, so once your training is over with, where are they sending you?
They sent us, some guys went directly to Vietnam. They sent some of us to, depending on your branch, I was an engineer officer at the time, so they sent us to Fort Meade to an aviation company that they wound up deactivating a couple months later. So then based on your specialty, your branch, I went to an engineer battalion at Fort Meade. And then I got orders to Vietnam. And they wanted me to essentially Vietnam 2 weeks after I got married. And so
Wow.
I said, I really want to try to get another qualification aircraft. They call them a transition. I asked to get into Cobras. They didn't have any slots. And then the said, well, how about Chinooks? And engineer branch said they did not have an aviation branch back then. So you had aviation divisions within infantry branch, aviation divisions with engineers.
Gotcha.
So engineers said, we don't have any Chinook slots. But my roommate was a warrant officer, worked in infantry branch, aviation. So I went to see him and says, yeah, I got 3 slots. I said, let's take your boss. It was a major. I'm a first lieutenant then. Let's take your boss out to lunch and talk to him about a slot. So I told him, sir, my name is T.C. Smith. You know what C stands for? Chinook. I want to be a Chinook pilot. And so I went back and gave my allocation to the engineers, and he sent me to Chinook transition, which is another 6 weeks of training down at Fort Rucker.
Okay, so keep in mind that a lot of people who might be watching this video later not that familiar with our participation in the war in Vietnam. Upon your deployment, what was the status over in Vietnam, and basically what was going on over there at that time when you got your orders to go to Vietnam?
I was stationed down in what they had 4 military regions. Region 1, which is up north, and Region 4 was down in the south in what we call the Delta. And I was assigned to the 271st Aviation Company as a line pilot and a platoon leader in a Chinook unit. So you get your missions every day, and we essentially supported the Vietnamese who had American advisors, and they were either Army or Marine Corps. And we moved troops. We moved a lot of artillery pieces around from place to place, along with the ammunition, and we call them water buffaloes, water trailers, things like that.
Your arrival was in August of 1970. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we did have one kind of exciting troop movement. This base camp was being overrun. Normal troop capacity for Chinook is 34 troops. Those are American troops, so obviously weigh a little bit more than the Vietnamese do. But we had 100 Vietnamese on that aircraft.
Whoa.
It was so overloaded that I couldn't hover. I had to do, you can do this in the Chinook. You can do a running takeoff just like you do with a fixed wing. And then we get to the objective area, and you have to do because of the ground fire that was taking place, we had to do what's called a spiraling approach. You get right over the landing zone and just spiral away down, so you don't shoot a standard approach. And we were told by our higher headquarters that we were not encouraged to assist the Vietnamese off the aircraft because we'd get in some of these hot LCs and they wouldn't get off the aircraft. So I told the crew as we're coming down. I said, you get these little rascals off here as fast as you can. I'm pulling all the power I have, 860 pounds of torque, which is max on the Chinook, and I'm still coming down. Not fast, but I can't stop. So we hit on the rear wheels, boom, boom, boom. And by the time we hit the third bounce, I looked out the side of the wheel, aircraft was empty. And the crew chief's in the back going like this. And then we got the hell out of there.
Let's go back a little bit. Tell me about your first impression of Vietnam on your first day there. What like everything from your thoughts, the weather, where it was that you landed.
Great question. What I remember, understand as a base to this question, you're normally used to flying 2.5 hours in flight school. And the first day in combat, the adrenaline is flowing. We were doing combat insertions with Chinooks, which they stopped doing after that because you're such a big target coming into a confined area. But we flew 9 hours. The weather was fine. There's two basic weather systems in Vietnam in the South Pacific. One is dry, one is wet. In a wet season, a rainy season, it rains every day, not all day, but every day. In the dry season, it never rains. So this would have been rainy season, but we did not have a lot of rain that day. And I just remember when I got finished flying, I could hardly walk. I mean, I was so mentally and physically exhausted from flying. And, you used to flying in peacetime at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and now you're coming in there at these landing zones and the machine guns are firing and your blood's circulating and I'm sure your heart rate is up, but you cannot be scared. You don't have time to be frightened because you've got to stay focused on your job. So that was kind of, I was just glad the day was over. I was just, it was like if you ever run a marathon, it's like how you feel when you've finished running a marathon. You're just drained.
Yeah.
And
can you tell us a little bit about the Chinook?
Sure.
The aircraft itself, the main purpose of it, the utility of it, and I believe they're still using the Chinook, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the aircraft.
It's a great aircraft. I think it makes a lot of noise. That's why most of us wear hearing aids to this day. But it'll carry internal loads and external loads. You'd normally like to fly with external loads because you can get rid of them quickly. The Chinooks now have 3 hooks, which helps stabilize loads, where we only had one. So sometimes they especially if it's a light load, maybe we used to recover Cobras when they're shot down. We would have to go in and do a hot recovery and get them out of there so they can be fixed. And they don't fly very well, but so
you can actually you can actually have a load of another helicopter.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
On the external hook, yes.
Yeah.
You can carry, the hook is rated at 20,000 pounds and carries, I think it's 1,000 gallons of JP4 jet fuel, and it'll do 165 knots, so it's probably the fastest helicopter out there. It's got a range of about 2.5 hours. And like I say, it's so good, it's so powerful. And of course they have upgraded the engines and transmission and the airframe since then, but that's why they're still flying in Afghanistan, or they were before we left, in Iraq, in those high altitude areas where you run into what they call density altitude issues, where you get up in the thin air, you can't carry as much. That's why sometimes the Black Hawks struggled to work at those higher altitudes. And we had trouble sometimes convincing the guys on the ground that they could not understand why we could not carry the same load at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that we did at 8 o'clock in the morning, because as the temperature increases, humidity increases, the density altitude goes up, which means you can't carry as much. But we had a hard time convincing them that that's how it had to work.
What kind of crew, how many crew members are on board?
We have 2 pilots and a door gunner, a flight engineer, and a crew chief, so 5.
And what's the door gunner have, a 60 or like a 50 or what?
We had 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Now one of the things different about a Chinook, because it's a little more complicated, is you have a lot of aircraft, you only have to have one qualified pilot. When I say current, he's qualified to fly it, but he doesn't have to be current. Maybe he hasn't flown in 45 days or so. Where in a Chinook, both pilots have to be current and qualified.
Gotcha.
And it's a good aircraft, but boy, when things turn south, they turn south quickly.
Mhm.
So but you sometimes people don't understand why we drill emergency procedures into pilots and why we train the same things over and over and over, because when things get bad, you automatically revert to whatever your instincts are. And your instincts are like when you have an engine failure, you don't have time to sit there and think about, what do you think I should do? Maybe I should look at the emergency procedure. You got to know right now what to do. Um, and I survived 2 of those.
So tell us a little bit about those 2 incidents.
Well, the first one was we were doing. I was one of the unit's maintenance test pilots. So when something gets fixed, you have to essentially. It's like when you take your car to the local Pohanka dealer. When you get your car out, somebody has to check it out, make sure it works. Well, that's what I had to do. And this aircraft.
Were you the lowest ranking guy? Is that why?
No, no. I will tell you another story in Germany about that. But this it's too complicated to explain exactly what happened. But one of the barrel nuts that for an engine, a transmission that fits on the end of an engine has to be put in with bolts, and this had to be fixed quickly because the aircraft had to take off. So they needed just to do what they call a traffic pattern test flight, which means you take off, you go down. The downwind leg is the leg of the traffic pattern that parallels the runway. And about halfway down the downwind leg, it was like Jesus Christ reached down there, grabbed that aircraft and starts shaking it like its needles are split like this. And you're thinking, this is not going to be a good day. So we essentially had to do a dive. And at this point, we don't know what the issue is. The flight engineer is in the back holding his hand up against what we call a combining transmission. You have 5 transmissions in a Chinook. And if you lose one of those, you're done, because your transmission stops, blade stop, you fall right out of the sky. It's like losing the wing in a fixed wing aircraft. He said, "Sir, I think the seat box is coming apart." And so again, you don't have time to think. You just have to. We just did a dive at the runway, and we landed. And the maintenance officer comes up. I can't use the language that I used to describe.
Feel free.
Yeah. Well, he said, "Hey, TC, we got the aircraft on the ground safely. Again, at this point, we don't know what caused it." And he said, "Okay, let's crank this thing up and see what's wrong with it." So I gave him the single finger salute. I said, "F you, buddy." I said, when you figure out what's wrong with it, you come back and see me, I'll go fly it. And so essentially, you could look, if you've ever seen a jet engine before, got turbine blades.
Mm-hmm.
It blew all the blades out, because when the first stage goes out, it blows the second stage out, and you could look right straight through the engine.
Wow.
Because that was a catastrophic engine failure.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the training is superb, and you just react accordingly.
And you had another incident similar to that?
That was in Germany. This aircraft had, it had a dual. You have 2 hydraulic systems in a Chinook. They're independent, and you cannot fly a Chinook without hydraulics. You can fly a Huey and a Black Hawk and a Kiowa and a Cobra without hydraulics. It's like driving a car with power steering. And now it's a little tougher, but you don't fly an aircraft doing this. You've got to be a lot smoother in the controls. So a Chinook, this aircraft, it was before I took over as the maintenance officer. This is in Schwäbisch Hall, Germany. The aircraft had a dual hydraulics failure. Fortunately, it was on the ground. Otherwise, the aircraft would have crashed. And nobody could really figure out how to fix it. So when it came time to test fly this aircraft, I was not the most experienced test pilot, and we had like a W3, one of our test pilots. So but I'm the maintenance officer, so I'm not going to put somebody else in the other seat. So I got in the other seat, and the first thing you do in a Chinook to take off, the first thing you do is you lift up the front nose up and stay on the back wheels, and then you kick your left pedal and right pedal. Make sure the flight controls are hooked up. When you put in left pedal, the nose turns left, and there must have been 20 people watching this, because this aircraft, you always refer to aircraft by the last 3 of the tail number, and this was Balls 2, 002 was the last, and this aircraft hadn't flown in a year. And so these people are looking around the hangar because they think this aircraft might just come apart. And I was a little anxious myself, but it was fine.
So let's go back to Vietnam.
Okay.
So you're newly married. How did you keep in contact with your wife at the time?
That was another great question. Letters primarily, and cassette tapes. So just tape, and then it essentially would cross the Pacific Ocean, and so sometimes you had trouble staying. current, and they had I think they called it Mars. I forgot what that acronym stands for, but essentially you're using a radio. And so you say, everything has to be terminated, every conversation has to be terminated with over. So you say, hey, honey, I love you, over. I mean, that just kind of takes some of it just doesn't work very well. But
Did you,
that's how we did it. And we were supposed to go on, we decided to have our R&R in Hawaii in June, and I was due to rotate back in August. And I got shot flying scout aircraft in May, so we never got to go on R&R.
tell me about that incident where you were wounded.
We had a scout platoon, and the scout aircraft, I thought the missions were a little more exciting than Chinook missions. So I volunteered to fly co-pilot on those missions, and you essentially go to the intelligence office in the battalion, and the S2 will give you a briefing. Says, okay, Greg, we think there's bad guys from Stafford up to Williamsburg, Fredericksburg. And so you do what's called visual reconnaissance. You're flying literally about 20 feet off the trees, and there's two scouts, and there's those OH-58s, the Kiowas. You sometimes can see them. I think they still fly them in the Fairfax County Police. At least they did a couple of years ago. And then you have two Cobras at 1,000 feet, and they're watching you. And you turn all your lights off, so there's no anti-collision lights or anything on. They're watching you, and then you have a command and control ship at 1,500 feet, and he's got a U.S. advisor in the back seat along with a province chief. And so they direct you, because they're at 1,500 feet, they can see better for you to navigate than you can out right on top of the trees. And you do what's called a recon by fire. You do, in this particular area of trees, we just went in and fired it up and see if anybody fires back. And then when they do, you have these smoke grenades already set up inside the aircraft. They got the pin in them, but the pin's not flared like you'd see in a normal grenade. So you can literally reach out there and just throw it out there quickly and mark the spot. Gunships come in and they're supposed to take that to target, and then that should be it. But these guys, they're normally pretty good. They didn't hit the target. And so the command and control ship says, we want you to go in there and do a BDA, a battle damage assessment. So when we went in there to do the battle damage assessment, they lit us up. And I took one round. We stripped the aircraft of everything that you don't absolutely have to have, because you want to keep your weight down. That gives you more fuel and more ammunition. And I took a round right below the left knee, and they just, you ever played baseball and get beamed?
Yes.
Yeah, that is exactly what it feels like. And what it sounds like is, if you recall what a popcorn machine sounds like.
Yes.
If you ask any pilots have been shot at, they will tell you that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a popcorn machine. And so they flew me to the hospital and just landed there. And when the aircraft got back, they found 43 bullet holes in it.
Mm.
Yeah, so we took some. The gunner, and the next day he got shot in the rear end, and it was only cute because he's a pretty good sized fella, and he was in the ward with me, and he had those stands that you have your IVs, so you can walk with a stand. Sir. He's got one of those. He's got two little patches on his rear end with the red spot on it. It was only funny because it didn't hit any organs, didn't break. There were more flesh wounds, but we told him, you better be sitting on a piece of armor plating. And he said, I don't need to do that. He's singing a different tune today.
So when you were struck, did you instantaneously realize that you were wounded?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What kind of damage did it do?
It broke the tibia vertically and horizontally, and it was what they call through and through. And they bring you in on a stretcher and set you down on a stand, and then the nurses just immediately start cutting your boots off and cutting your flight suit off, and then the doctor looks at you, and you always know how many days you have left in the country. You may not remember your name, but you know exactly how many days you have. And so he's looking at the wound. He says, how many days you got left? I said 110. He says, you're going home. And if I could have got off that cot, I'd have kissed him. But yeah, so then but let me give you a precursor to that day. I woke up and I had a premonition, and I've had them before and after, and I've never materialized. But this day I said, something is not right today. And I was just shaving, and I didn't have to fly that day. So we had program at Canto, which is our base, and every unit has a part of the pie of the perimeter that they're responsible for. And we had a group of what they call Chu Hois. These are North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers who have come over to our side, and they're showing us how easy it is to get into our perimeter. They're very patient. They crawl through the mud and snip the concertina wire and go back out, and come back, snip some more. Next thing you know, they're in your perimeter. So now the company commanders are all paranoid and hyperactive about, because we had a lot of grass growing through these concertina wires, so you couldn't really tell if it had been cut. So we took some contaminated jet fuel. We couldn't use an aircraft, and they're spraying us down, and they're going to throw a thermite grenade out there, light it up, and then it would burn the grass off. Well, in the process of doing that, these are all the five volunteers. They were all pilots that weren't flying that day. And one of them hit a trip flare. And when, of course, he did that, it just, all that fuel, it's just a whole sheet of flames going up. 4 people got out. One guy was in there, I don't know, 5 or 6 seconds. And I'm standing right beside the fuel truck. I'm watching this. And I said, this is not a good place to be. So, and he was walking, he never said a word. Never, his skin is peeled back and his hair looked like a Barbie doll, all switched down. And so I went over to the gate and I got a Jeep. And I drove him to the hospital, which would be, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 miles, but it was through a village. So it's not easy to navigate, but I got him into the hospital and I stayed with him and until they took him away. And then, what happens when you somebody is close to you, you lose them or they get hurt seriously and you're just kind of down in the dumps. And so they come by that night and because we did our scout missions at first light when the sun comes up, and last light when the sun goes down. That's when the Viet Cong were moving. And so that's where they would look. They wanted us to go out and find them. And they came by and said, "Hey, can you fly tonight?" I said, I can, but see if you can find somebody else. So they come back 20 minutes later and say, "You're it." So that's how I wound up flying that mission. And about 6 hours later, I was in the bed next to him.
Wow.
After I got operated on and put me in the intensive care ward.
Combat wounded, active shooter survivors, people that have been in disasters and crisis have reported different phenomena that occurred when they're in a life or death situation, such as denial, tunnel vision, time distortion. Did you experience anything like that at all in that incident or any other incidents during the war?
What I recall, Greg, is we had a first aid kit in the back, and I could see the bones were sticking out the side of my knee. And the orthopedic surgeon said, "You're one lucky young man. If that round had gone in, it was a small arms round from AK-47, we think. It would have taken out the knee and you wouldn't have a lower leg." So I just remember asking him, I remember the feeling of this was what it feels like to get beamed. And then he gave me my first impression, first aid training is stop the bleeding. So he gave me the first aid, the patch with it, and I just wrapped the knee in it and they flew me into the hospital. But other than that, I don't remember too much about it.
Gotcha. So, living conditions. Where were you? Where did you call home every night after missions? Were you in tents, buildings? Where were you?
We never got to call. If you even call home, we never got to call home except that one Mars call.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, where did you lay your head down? Is what I meant by call home.
We were in hooches, and I feel bad about saying that because the infantry guys, they're out there in the boonies. They don't have hooches except when they come in from patrols. But if you were to look at our living conditions, you say, "Man alive, this is a dump." But to us, it was nice. We didn't have air conditioning, but we had I had 2 other roommates, and they had one of those big fans on a stand. That was our air conditioning, and our latrine. We had a latrine. It was decent. It was okay. And then our colonel didn't care for the carrying on that some of the other guys did at night. And they got in trouble when they went up and knocked on his trailer. He was a colonel. He was our group commander. And they asked him if he had any bourbon at 1 o'clock in the morning. That did not go over well. So we got moved across the runway after that. And then we had to use regular latrines. I mean,
Like the 50-gallon drums cut in half. Yeah.
yep, yeah, you kind of just get used to it. You don't,
Mhm.
nobody asks you if you like it. You just have to deal with it. But so
Did you have-
that's where we lived. And what we did is we took a couple of these hooches that had really thin walls, maybe 1/4 inch plywood in between rooms. And what we would do is we take 2 or 3 rooms and knock out the walls and have our own little bar. So we had a bar and a one of the hooch maids would be a bartender, and I think beers were 10 cents and Jack and Coke was 35 cents. And they keep track of it on the refrigerator, and then you pay at the end of the month. And if you had a night mission and you came in and these guys had been, they post the mission board at 9 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock, you know if you're flying the next day. Usually fly you 3 or 4 days in a row and then give you a down day where you can do your administrative duties. But you come into that little bar at 10 o'clock after you've been flying at night, and these guys have been partying since about 5. Your chances of having a T-shirt that stays in one piece are 0. But it's camaraderie that you have, and that's one of the things that I would like to stress that in my experience in the Army, but particularly in combat, is, you know, I may not know you. You may be my wingman, and I don't know you. Or maybe you're an infantryman in the next foxhole of the fighting position. I don't know you, but you know what? I will lay down my life for you, and it's nothing that we ever talk about. It's this trust, in this understood trust in each other, and that we will do what has to be done in order to save each other. We had an aircraft, one of our Cobras was going back to get fuel, and he had an engine failure, and he got on the emergency. They're required to monitor an emergency frequency, and it's already preset in your radio. You just have to flip a switch and you're talking on, it's called a guard frequency. And he called Canto Tower. This is his call sign was Death Dealer 28. This is Dealer 28. I'm 5 miles east of your location, and I blankety blank engine just quit, just like that. No screaming, no yelling, and he did a perfect auto rotation. And before, this is just an example of unrehearsed, uncoordinated help. Before his aircraft, before the rotor blade stopped turning, we had him picked up. We had gunships from another unit providing overhead cover. We had Air Force TAC Air jets flying overhead in case we needed them. We had medevac flights inbound if we needed them. All of it totally unrehearsed, and that's what Americans do. That, you know, we hear that there's an American in trouble, American down, we don't care what rank you are, we don't care about the color of your skin, who you call God, where you came from, or where you're going. You're in trouble, we're coming to get you, period. And it's just something is in kind of inbred in us. Again, it's not something you talk about. When you go out to pre-flight the aircraft in the morning, I go to the crew chief, and they come out there, they have to do what's called a daily inspection before we come out there. So they're out there an hour before we are, and they're doing their inspection, and they say, "Hey chief, how's it looking?" He says, "Sir, looking pretty good." And of course, the fact that he's flying with me does not go unnoticed, you know, when he tells me that, because he's going to ride, he's with me, but I'm still going to do my pre-flight. But I trust him when he tells me this aircraft's in good shape. And then once we take off, that trust transfers from the back of the aircraft to the front of the aircraft, where they're trusting us and the 2 guys in the front, in the 2 front seats. That we're not going to do something stupid that's going to get them hurt. And again, it's not something you ever talk about. It's just kind of universally understood.
So, do you ever have an opportunity to see a USO show or anything like that when you're overseas?
Yes, I got to, they had a small one come to Canton in one of our hangars. I got to see, but I never got to go to the Bob Hope show or anything, but that's why to this day, I'm a big supporter of the USO.
And were you stationed in one place your entire tour? Or were you different? And what base was that?
It was Canto.
Canto?
CANTHO, 2 words.
Gotcha.
It's down on the Mekong Delta.
Okay. When you think about your tour in Vietnam, are there any specific memories that stand out as a significant event during your tour, other than the ones you already discussed?
No, there's a couple humorous ones. We had to take when you have what we call BS missions, where maybe you have to fly a bunch of reporters around for a big award ceremony for the Vietnamese. That's not a mission you really get excited about. And this Vietnamese major was yelling at my flight engineer and saying he wanted to put more people on than we were supposed to take. Because in these BS missions, you do exactly what the book says. If it's a combat mission, like at resupply, you do whatever it takes. So this guy's giving my flight engineer a bad time. And in the back of the aircraft, there's a relief tube, which looks like the funnel off a fire extinguisher. And so he tells this Vietnamese major that this is the intercom to the cockpit. So he's got him yelling in his relief tube, thinking he's talking to the cockpit. And so that was kind of humorous. But they can be tough. During the Tet Offensive, the big Tet Offensive was 1968, but they had, every year they have a Tet Offensive, and we were at one of the landing zones, and their people are just trying to get out of there, trying to climb on the aircraft. They're reaching inside. In fact, one of them reached around and grabbed one of the hydraulic lines and broke it. It was a utility. So it's not one of the flight controls, but it was one where I couldn't steer when I got on the ground, and I couldn't stop. There's no brakes, because that just talks about the enthusiasm they have for getting out of wherever they're at. And so they just try to jump on the aircraft and hang on, and you can't fly with them like that.
Can you describe your homecoming?
Yes, another great question. I came back in the back of a medevac plane, a C-141, and we landed, and we had to spend the night in Japan. I mean, you go from Vietnam to Japan, operate on you again, and you get there, stay there, stabilize about 2 weeks, and then go back to the States. And I just remember landing at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, and right outside of St. Louis. And I remember when they opened up those clamshell doors in the back to let the ambulatory patients walk off, they had just cut, this is May, they had just cut the grass, and that smell of fresh cut grass was so nice. Then we go back to Andrews, and they took us in a medical bus from there to Walter Reed. But getting back to your homecoming, so I didn't have to go to the airports and have people spitting on me and that, calling me baby killer, and some of my colleagues had to do that. But when I was on convalescent leave from Walter Reed, my wife and I were at it was in Bailey's Crossroads. And it was a hot dog place. It was kind of an upper end place. And we go there, and I'm in a full leg cast on crutches. And the waitress looks at me and says, "So what happened? What happened to you? Did you get hurt water skiing?" I said, "No, I got shot flying helicopters." And this is the exact quote. She said, "It's too bad you didn't get killed." That's what she said. And so, as a Christian, I've forgiven her, but you don't ever forget that. And so I'm so glad that we don't treat soldiers like that anymore, because I think the American public, many of them could not separate the policymakers from the policy implementers. We weren't making the policy, we were the implementers, but they blamed us for all of that. Are you familiar with a program called the Purple Heart Honor Mission?
The honor flights, or the?
Oh no, not the flights. This is separate from that. This is a program where they pick one Purple Heart recipient from each state, and they fly you and somebody who anybody you pick to go with you. I took my son because my wife passed away from COVID a couple of years ago, but so I took him, and they all expenses paid. They fly you to New York. They pick you up. They give you a tour of the city, to include a tour of the harbor where they had the fireboats giving you a salute with their hoses. You spend a day. You go to the 9/11 Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial. Have a lunch where in one of the taverns where George Washington said goodbye to his officers, and then they take you to the Purple Heart Museum, and it's where people it's kind of a difficult place to go to, but it just kind of brings back some memories that we really kind of try to suppress, but it was all done very well. Again, people donate hotel rooms to us, donate food to us, and then we spend a day at West Point, getting a tour of the military academy, and then we get a escort we're in 2 tour buses, and we got escorted by 5 police cars and 65 motorcycles from West Point to Newburgh, I think Newburgh, New York. And they ended in an armory. So we went through with all the lights flashing. We went through we must have gone through 15 intersections. That was so cool. I've always wanted to run red lights. And we got to run about 15 of them. And then we get there, and this was really the highlight of the entire week. And this was the purpose was that this is the homecoming you guys never received. And there were a few Iraq, Afghanistan vets too, maybe 5 or 6. So it wasn't all of Vietnam, but predominantly it was Vietnam vets. And they would bring you in to this armory one at a time, alphabetically by state. They would introduce you, and then you have to go through a little line, a roped line, and it's 300 or 400 people are slapping you on the back and shaking your hand, say welcome home. And man, oh, I can't tell you what an emotional experience that was. So that they did that to try to compensate for the homecoming we didn't get. So that's my homecoming story. But they do that every year.
What year was that you participated in?
It was last fall.
Okay, outstanding. Well, welcome home. I'm a Desert Storm vet, and when we flew home, there was a lot of Vietnam veterans that led the charge to make sure that America didn't make the same mistakes that we did in the 1970s. And I know I can't speak for my whole veteran group, but I can speak for myself. I do appreciate all the Vietnam veterans did to make things right after that.
Well, thank you for that. To this day, I still mentor ROTC students at William and Mary in Christopher Newport, and I'm proud to say that one of them just got promoted to captain. He's a helicopter pilot and down at Fort Stewart. And when he got branched aviation when he was at Fort Rucker, he said, TC, I want you to come down here and pin my wings on. So I took my wings that I got in 1969 and pinned him on him. So he's got my wings to this day.
That must have meant the world to him and also to you, I would assume.
Yeah, it does. He was a pitcher on the baseball team too. But yeah, it does. And then my second one, he was a Christopher Newport ROTC guy, and Christopher Newport is under the same ROTC umbrella as William and Mary. And he just got promoted to first lieutenant, and he's an artilleryman over in Germany. And I pinned when he was promoted, when he was commissioned. His mother, we had the shoulder boards. His mother put one on and I put the other one. He wanted me to do that. And that's, you can't buy that. I mean, this is all unpaid, but this is emotional income that you can't buy anywhere else. And so we still chat with each other. I give him all about a 4 typewritten page, not an essay, but a list of things that I call it. Here's what I learned that I wish I knew as a second lieutenant. Things they don't teach you in school, whether it's a military academy or ROTC or OCS, they don't teach you a lot of this stuff. And so these guys keep that stuff.
Can you give us some of that advice?
Yeah, no, leadership principle number 6, know your men and look after their welfare. Because if you do that, Greg, you're not gonna, I don't care about the other 9 leadership principles. If you do that, you'll never have a problem. Once your troops trust you, and that's the key, the operative word, I think, in leadership, especially military leadership, is when your troops trust you to look after them. And if they do something wrong, you're going to defend them in front of the boss, and then you're going to talk to them behind closed doors. But when they know that they trust you, and you should always try to explain to them, here's our mission, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. Once they trust you, there'll be a time when you don't have time to tell them why we're doing it. We just have to do it, and they'll just absolutely 100% follow you. And when they have when you leave, because I was stationed at Fort Bragg 3 times and Fort Hood once, when you have a little beer thing for you when you leave, and they say, hey, sir, raise a beer and say, you're okay. You know that you did good.
Which leads to my next question. Your military career did not end in Vietnam. You went on to retire as an 06, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you stay in aviation that entire time?
No, only because as commissioned officers, a commissioned aviator, warrants are going to stay in aviation the whole time. But we also have other specialties. I was a strategic mobility, quote unquote, expert. And I helped write the justification for the C-17 when I was on the Army staff. And I feel very proud about that. And if you're a major in the Pentagon, it's like being a second lieutenant. I mean, you come from being XO of an aviation battalion, 1,100 people, and you used to making things happen. You get to the Pentagon as a major, you can't make anything happen. But if you have a reputation for being what they call an iron major, which means Greg, you may be a major, but if you're an expert in your field, I want to talk to you when I get in trouble. When I have a question, I want to I'm going to talk to you. And once they know that you will tell them the truth, not what they want to hear, but what they need to hear, and you get a good reputation. So I worked on the G3, what they call it DESOPS at the time, but the G3, and then I came back after the War College and was on the Joint Staff in J4 as a logistical planner. And you just have to be truthful with these guys. They're most of them are the generals and the flag officers are terrific gentlemen, great leaders, but they want somebody who's going to tell them the truth. And if they don't like it, then go find somebody else, because I'm not going to tell you what you need to hear unless it's what you want to hear.
If you happen to have a conversation with a young man or young woman and they say they're thinking about enlisting or becoming commissioned in the U.S. Army, what kind of advice would you give them to achieve their goals and then to be successful? You already mentioned the leadership principles. And anything else you would give them? Piece of advice?
You always do the best you can. Take care of your soldiers. Keep your nose clean and take advantage of every opportunity to get schooling.
Good advice.
Yeah, sure. And to be successful, I think, at least as a commissioned officer, you have to love soldiers. You have to have a fundamental love of soldiers, not like them. And you don't want to be a battalion commander so you can boss people around. You do it so you can take care of soldiers. And once they know that, you'll do well. One of the things I did as a battalion commander, I had the S1, our personnel officer. She had the birthday of every person in the battalion, and I would send them a letter on their birthday and said, "Hey, Greg, thanks for the great work you're doing in the battalion, and you're a great attribute to the country and to your unit. And so with this letter, you go see your first line supervisor and you can have a 3-day pass." And I never heard any feedback. I'm thinking, geez, I wonder if this is working, until one troop came up and said, "Hey, Colonel Smith, where's my letter?" He didn't get a letter. So that's how you know this, that the word is out, that you take care of your troops.
Mm-hmm. So you still continue to serve in the military circles. So you're involved with the a Purple Heart organization, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about the organization and your role?
Sure. I am the military Order of the Purple Heart is the smallest veteran group, because you have to have a Purple Heart to be in it. No Purple Heart, you can't be, even though we'd love to have you, you can't be a member. But we're divided into 50 states, 6 regions, and each state is called a department. So I'm the commander for the Williamsburg chapter of the military Order of the Purple Heart, and I also am dual-hatted as the department commander for Virginia. And what we do is we raise money and give it back to the community. Every cent we make off of like golf tournaments that we have, we give back to the community. And my favorite example is at Fort Eustis, they have a program there called the Emergency Food Voucher Program. It's a program where if a young soldier, almost always married, can't make it through the end of the month with putting food on the table, then he can come to this office under the Army Community Services and talk to a retired command sergeant major, and he can get a food voucher to go over there to the PX, or not the PX, the commissary, and buy food to get him through the end of the month. No alcohol, no tobacco products. And if he comes back a second time, he has to go see a financial planner to get to the root cause of why can't we make it through the end of the month. Let's start a budget and help you manage your financial assets. This program gets no federal funding, none. We are the largest supporter of this program. And they gave out between Thanksgiving last year and Christmas, they gave out 192 vouchers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anybody that says that the soldiers make a lot of money, no, they don't.
Yeah, that shows you the need, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, these are typically blended families, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 5 kids, and so we give back.
And you raise most of the money through fundraising efforts, like what you said, like golf tournaments, stuff like that.
Yeah, golf tournament, and we've been doing it probably for 8 years now, and the word gets out, and people, we do a good job running the golf tournament. What I tell the guys in my chapter, we are the smallest chapter in Virginia because there's just not a lot of Purple Heart recipients in Williamsburg, but we have the largest percentage of people attending meetings and stuff. So we have that going for us. And I tell them, if you guys just without getting on a soapbox and trying to preach the gospel to them about what you do for the troops, you just get up there and talk to them. My neighbors will literally line up at my door and to give me money. Not a lot, sometimes just $25, but that's $25 we didn't have earlier.
If somebody's watching this video, how could they donate to your organization?
They can go to the Purple Heart military or the purpleheart.org website, and there'll be ways that, or you can give them my information. I'll get them wherever, I'll point them in the right direction.
Standing.
But we're all unpaid volunteers.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about volunteering and nonprofits, I understand you were involved with a pretty important ceremony in Arlington National Cemetery in November of last year. Can you tell us about the ceremony and your involvement in that?
Yeah. I forgot how I got involved initially, but Richard Azario asked me to get involved in this. We met him through the military or the Purple Heart. And as soon as he told me about it, says, I'm in. So I drove up from Williamsburg and came in, I think I worked 2 days. And it's just, it was just a chance of a lifetime. This is the first time in 100 years they've opened up the ability to place flowers at that, as a civilian, to place flowers on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And so Richard took me out there. He was part of the old guard. So he used to walk he called it walking the mat. He used to walk the mat. And he took me up there and says, he and I were standing maybe 5 feet from the actual tomb, saluting it. And just, it's hard to describe how unique that felt, and what a distinct pleasure and honor it was to be representing and paying homage to your brothers and sisters who have, many of them, given the ultimate sacrifice. I've got several friends buried there. My parents are both buried there. My wife is buried there. So I've been there a number of times, and it's just a unique honor and a privilege to be able to do that, and to be able just to help facilitate that. What I did is, along with several other people, we handed out flowers. And yeah, there were several, all the branches of service were there and wearing their Navy gear or Air Force, Army gear. And this was right before the Army Navy game. So we're handing out flowers and said, you know what, we love you guys. We love you boys 364 days a year, but not on Army Navy Day. Exactly. But it was done well. And it was just an honor and a privilege to participate in that once in a lifetime event, to be able to pay your respects to our fallen brothers and sisters, and to see the sun come up over that Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This is before they let any of the public in. Was just amazing. It was a once in a lifetime. I just feel privileged to have been able to do that.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Hamre, who was one of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and he was involved with this ceremony. He described Arlington National Cemetery as being unique and special to the American people. Why do you think that? Why do you think those grounds are unique and special to America?
Well, it represents, every person in there represents somebody who served their country. They may not have all died in combat, but they all served their country. And you look at all those tombstones in there, and I've got fellow pilots that are in there. Our high school class president was Mike Miner. He was West Point class of 70, yeah, and he went in the Air Force, and he was killed in Vietnam. So it represents every one of those headstones represents a family, and not just the soldier, but the family that served the country. Because I don't think the wives and even the kids get the the respect that they deserve as they are our backbone. When you're deployed overseas and I'm deployed, you're going downrange. And when I'm in Vietnam, they keep the family going. And every one of those headstones represents a family that devoted their lives to our country.
Said. What were your observations about the Americans? And I'm assuming they probably had foreign dignitaries that may or may not have been there too. Do you think that they appreciated how important the place was
Oh, yeah.
and the unique opportunity to be able to get that close to the tomb?
Yes. Yep. I would say it was more the not the dignitaries, but the average person. I think they're the ones who really appreciated the opportunity to lay a flower on that tomb. So I would say, I'm sure the dignitaries did too, but I think the average person that came through those lines, and those lines were horrifically long, but they moved quickly. Yeah, so I'd say it was more the average person and how much they appreciated the opportunity to do that and participate in that ceremony.
Gotcha. So, as you know, we're recording this right now, and in a couple of weeks, we'll send you a copy of the video. We'll also send instructions on how you can send this video to the Library of Congress, the Veterans History Project there, where they have thousands and thousands of stories of American servicemen and servicewomen who served their country. Theoretically, a couple of 100 years from now, when your great grandkids might stumble upon this video, what would you want them to know? What message do you have for them about your service to our country?
I would tell them that there's no greater honor than to serve your country. If it's not in the military, it could be in the Peace Corps, could be in your community, but you have to understand the concept of service, giving back. I was privileged to be the guest speaker at an airborne school graduation a couple of years ago, and I told those guys and gals, among other things, I said, you know what? At the end of your life, you may wonder. Some people are going to wonder, did I make a difference? I said, you guys and gals will never have to worry about that. You'll know that you served your country, and there's no higher calling than to be called and be referred to as a soldier or a Marine. So I would just use the word service.
Well said. Is there anything else that you wanted to document about your military service?
No, I just going back to the Pentagon, I would just say that have some people say, well, you'll never get me to go to the Pentagon, and I say that you're certainly entitled to that opinion. But let me tell you one thing: if you are going to complain about some of the policies that come out of the Defense Department, and you don't go there as a young major with troop experience, and we call it muddy boots input, and try to get these guys to make halfway decent, realistic, troop-friendly decisions, then don't ever complain about a decision comes out of there.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
On behalf of the Americans in Wartime Museum, I thank you for spending an hour with us today. More importantly, I thank you for your service to our country. Thanks, Colonel. I appreciate it.
All right, Greg. Thanks for your time.